So in case you haven't heard the news, the Disney purchase of Fox is definitely going to happen now, which means that Disney is going to own several different Fox properties. And I wanted to do a video about this because this greatly affects the entertainment industry. In fact, it could be one of the biggest stories in the history of all entertainment when you really think about it. And it affects kind of the videos that, I do and several of my friends do. And it affects really the entire subculture of geek culture. It affects all of us. And I want to talk about the pros and cons of this because I talked a little bit about it a few months ago, but now that the deal's finalized, I've had a chance to kind of reflect on sort of what this could mean for the business. I think a lot of people are very excited about this, and I understand why. The fanboy part of me is definitely excited because this means, it opens up a whole bunch of new possibilities for the future of specifically the MCU, because now that Fox has been purchased, that pretty much means that there's a very good chance, if not a guarantee, when you really think about it, that the Fox characters that have not been able to appear in movies because of deals that were made 30 years ago or 20 years ago or whatever can finally appear. So that means the X-Men and the Fantastic Four can finally be a part of the MCU. We can see Galactus and Silver Surfer and all these characters that were owned for the movie universe by Fox now be incorporated into the MCU, and that will lead us to many more MCU stories. So yes, that is a good thing, but I feel like a lot of people are being very short-sighted when it comes to the future of the movie industry overall. Now, hear me out with what I have to say about this. Short term, and what I mean by short term is not like a couple months, I mean like 2, 3, 4, 5 years. This is a good move specifically for the MCU. Like, that's without question a huge move for that, because now with Phase 4 coming up after Avengers 4, we can now bring in the X-Men, like I said, bring in these characters, and we can finally see these great, see the entire Marvel universe, with the exception of maybe some of the Spider-Verse that Sony owns, some, not all. And also we can get a full remaster, re-release of Star Wars Episode 4 A New Hope, because remember, that still is owned by Fox as far as distribution goes. So for Disney to put that movie out and remaster it, they would have to have paid Fox a cut. Now that they own everything, it's all Disney, there's no restrictions, they can put it out. So that's good news. Not to mention that Disney owning some of the biggest properties in the history of entertainment is a good idea, I think, because they've done relatively well with Marvel. With Star Wars, they did well up to a certain point, but that story's still being written, so I think we shouldn't fully write that off, because yeah, right now Star Wars is very split, but in the future that could all be fixed. I mean, I don't think it's too late. But the scary part is what this could mean for the movie business as far as Disney, and it's not a monopoly. It's not a monopoly, but because of how much power Disney has with specifically the nerd culture portion of the fandom that goes to see movies, this is a very dangerous thing, because you never want to give one studio, one company this much power, okay? There were reports when The Last Jedi came out, and there were even some reports about when Force Awakens came out, and this was years ago, and nobody really talked about it, that Disney was essentially trying to force movie theaters into having a certain number of screens play the film a certain number of times. The one that was most vocal, I think, was Quentin Tarantino with The Hateful Eight. When Force Awakens came out, I remember he complained because apparently he was kicked out of some movie theaters of playing Hateful Eight because they wanted Star Wars Force Awakens. Now, I understand why. Star Wars is a big property, probably one of the biggest in the history of movies, and you really can't fight against that, because money-wise, more people went to go see Force Awakens than any Quentin Tarantino movie. Now, I love Quentin Tarantino, but that's a fact. So Disney knows what they have. They know they have power. And when you have competition in the business of movies or of anything, it always ends up creating a better situation for the audience, the fans, us. When we have competition among studios, it doesn't allow one studio to get too much power and kind of roll over the other ones. But now Disney is like this big sort of, like Galactus in many ways, like this big sort of blob that's like swallowing up all these properties, and it's not anymore this competitive environment. Even though it's still going to remain somewhat competitive, it's still becoming very unfair. Like, Disney's control over the movie industry now. And I'm not saying that they're going to necessarily abuse this power. That's not what I'm saying. But there have been hints to them possibly abusing this power. And, of course, absolute power corrupts. So they know they can push their weight around now even more than before. And Disney was already so powerful. I mean, think about just the last couple years, okay? Just the last 2-3 years. Every major movie that's made tons of money, not everyone, but the vast majority, like 90% of them, have been under the Disney umbrella, whether it be the remakes of the animated films like Beauty and the Beast and Dumbo's coming up or whatever, those, or MCU movies or Star Wars. Disney just owns so much of the movie industry when it comes to movies that are big budget, big bank movies. They own almost all of it now, and that's not a good thing, because if you have so much market share and not enough competition, it could lead to a couple things happening. Number one, like I said, they could end up using that power to push other movies away and to force movie theaters to solely play, you know, their movies. In which case, if enough complaints happen, then the FCC or somebody like that might have to step in, and then things get complicated and it becomes this big deal. You know, you don't want to ever have that happen. And I hope it doesn't, because Disney makes so much money they don't have to do that. But it's something that's possible. That's number one. Number two, it could also lead to a dip in quality. It could, because when you think about it, when there's competition, the more competition there is, the harder you tend to try. And when you look at stuff like, you know, Coke and Pepsi, if it wasn't for Pepsi, Coke wouldn't try so hard. They're very competitive. If it wasn't for Burger King, McDonald's wouldn't go as hard as they do. You know, it's competition. Now, I'm not saying that these companies are, like, cutthroat, even though they have done competitive things. Like, for example, you know, like in the 80s, Burger King put out the Whopper, and then McDonald's put out the McDLT, which was like their counter to the Whopper. That was later on renamed to the Big and Tasty. It's the same sandwich, though. It's basically a lettuce and tomato sandwich is what it was. That's essentially the gimmick here, right? It sounds like so weird because lettuce and tomato are very common on burgers now, but back then it was like a deal. It was like a big deal back then. I wasn't even born, I don't think, when all this happened. But anyways, and then more recently, actually, Burger King put out a fake Big Mac called the Big King. That's what they do. They compete. And in some ways, it's very annoying. Like, me as a creator, like, I hate when somebody steals my ideas. It happens all the time. It always annoys me. In this business, though, it just comes with the competition. They're trying to reverse engineer things. You know, you have the iPhone, then you have the Android smartphone, which is not exactly the iPhone, but it's still, you know, it has the same concepts, you know, which, again, that's not really stealing, but it's conceptually the same idea. So, that being said, you know, competition does create a better environment for the buyer, which is us. You know, we get better stuff typically. And I would like to think that Disney would never allow their films to dip in quality. I would like to think that, but we've seen it happen in the past. I mean, not every Disney movie or movie under the Disney property is necessarily a classic. We've seen some mediocre films in the MCU. Star Wars Last Jedi split the fandom. I mean, there's so many we could talk about that Disney's put out. So I would like to think that they don't purposely ever want to make a bad movie. And that's the other thing, too, is that's one thing that you have to understand is nobody ever wants to make a bad movie. But when you have this much power and this much control, Disney can bully around smaller movie theater chains. Oh, well, you have to play Last Jedi on this many screens. And we don't care if such and such director wants to put a movie out. It's not a Disney movie. We don't care. And that creates a very dangerous environment. And also, one thing I am worried about is the damn prices for Blu-rays, dude, because Disney Blu-rays, whether it be Star Wars, MCU, or even the classic movies, they're all like freaking $25-$30. Even nowadays, the old MCU Phase 1 and Phase 2 movies are still not in the freaking $8 or $10 or even $5 bins. They're not there. Whereas if I go and get something from the DCEU or a Fox film, I can go and buy X-Men, the old X-Men movies now, for like $20 for like 3 of them. But Disney never does those things. They always overprice their Blu-rays. Always. It's very annoying. So now there's going to be even more movies that are going to get re-released that are going to be overpriced. Because that's what Disney always does. And that's what happens when you have so much control. So everyone can celebrate right now this idea of, oh, Disney bought Fox, we're going to get all this crossover stuff. Well, that's great. Yeah, we are. Short term, that's going to be fun, but long term, Disney now has more control over your wallet, and that's never a good thing. I kind of wish that Disney would have just gotten just the Marvel Fox stuff, like, you know, X-Men and Fantastic Four, and just left everything else alone. But no, they own a lot more now. A lot more. And again, short term, I'm excited to see what they do. I'm very excited to see what Kevin Feige does with X-Men. I really want to see that X-Men versus Avengers movie. That needs to be Avengers 5. It should be Avengers versus X-Men. That's a ticket seller and a half right there. You know what I mean? Right there. Or Onslaught Saga. Like, right there, you've sold tickets. Or, you know, other things they're going to do. I, as a fan, want to see it, okay? But I am concerned because it's one big corporation getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And you never want to have one corporation have all the power. You never want to do that. And when you look at like the history of the United States when it comes to corporations, back in the day there were a lot more. There were literally hundreds more corporations there are now because the big ones keep buying out the little ones and buying them out, and it becomes this big sort of virus effect. And that's a scary thing because they control. The more you own, the more you control when it comes to properties. And that's the thing, is you have to remember that. Just remember that, because it could end up being a problem in the future. I certainly don't want to pay $30 a Blu-ray for every freaking movie that comes out that I want to see from the Disney Fox brand. I sure as hell don't. And we may have to. That's the sad truth, is that we may have to pay that much. And I don't want to. It's not fair. I don't want to. If I want to go to a movie theater, you know, if I've already seen Black Panther, I've already seen Avengers, I want to see a different film, I don't want to have to wait until the Saturday morning showing to go see that film, because Disney insists on having the Thursday and Friday night showings be only their movies. And they've done things like this before. So those are my thoughts on the Disney Fox purchase. Good short term, possibly bad long term. I will revisit this topic in a few years if I'm even still around. I hope to be, but you never know with the way these things work. And we'll see how things go from there and see if they actually did abuse it or if they were playing fair. Because at this point, I mean, the money ain't going to go nowhere. Disney will be fine. Let me know what you think. Talk to you soon.